Awesome. And once again, a big and local welcome to everyone here. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Diana Castillo, and I am the Educational Initiatives and Youth Programs Coordinator here at UnLocal, which is just a really long way to say that I'm the person that does our student programming and our one-on-one student support. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But once again, thank you so much for being here today. As Cindy mentioned, we are here primarily to talk about the New York State DREAM Act. We're going to visit state aid opportunities and additional resources for our immigrant students. The slides will be shared afterwards. I will be pausing in the middle for questions as well as the end. We're not too big of a group, so by all means, we can use the chat, the mic, and I will be sharing my email in case there are any follow-up questions afterwards. So our agenda for today, we have about an hour and change together. So we'll dive into a lot of topics, beginning with more of an intro to UnLocal, best practices for immigrant students, and then diving into overview for New York State DREAM Act, both eligibility requirements and the application process, before diving into state aid opportunities and then tying everything up with additional resources. It is a lot of information, so bear with me. Once again, we'll have questions in the middle at the end. I'll be around a little bit afterwards, and you will have my email. So hopefully any additional questions, we can go ahead. And if I don't have the answer, I will always reach out to my colleagues, and we can always find the method through Sandy or just through each other to go ahead and follow up. So let's dive right in, beginning with an intro to UnLocal. Now, UnLocal is a nonprofit that operates out of two departments. We have our legal team, which provides a series of legal representation as well as consultation to New York State's undocumented communities. As you'll see here, it is New York State. I often have the question, is it limited to the boroughs? No, we take folks as well as beyond the boroughs as long as they are in New York. Now, our legal team dives into two separate teams, or mini teams, I should say. Our post-order defense project, also known as POD, and they specifically work with non-citizens who have a removal order and are already detained by ICE and or have risk of detention and deportation by ICE. Then we have our secondary project, the Pro Se Plus project, known as PSPP, which empowers immigrants to advocate for themselves and mobilize community supporters. PSPC creates and delivers robust community educational workshops explaining the entire immigration system, from U.S. immigration to eligibility requirements to work authorization to the application process for asylum, their evidence packets, preparing for interview and court hearings, quite literally the immigration process from beginning to end. And why, right? Why have we shifted over to this model where now folks are advocating for themselves? The reality is there are more folks who need immigration attorneys than there are immigration attorneys at this moment. For full transparency, UnLocal's attorneys are completely at capacity for about the next 2 to 3 years. And that's because of the immense need and also because of the halt that immigration court took back in 2020 under COVID. So folks are still going ahead and having hearings and appointments with lawyers that, once again, their case might have been done at this point, but the reality is delays from COVID, and also the immigration court system moves quite slow. So Local, with a bunch of other legal collaboratives, have created the PSPP project as a way for folks to self-empower and still represent themselves in a way that they are empowered with their tools and feel like they're entering the process with the best knowledge that they have. And I can go ahead and link folks to what that page looks like. We have a series of presentations of one-pagers where folks can really tap into those resources. So that's a little bit about our legal team. And now our education outreach team, which I work a part of. I am not an attorney. So UnLocal here values education as a tool for advocacy and strives to empower immigration communities by connecting them with key resources. We pride ourselves on collaborating with organizations, schools, nonprofits, and students to create information and presentations that students, families, organizations are directly looking for. And that ties into our second pillar, that we prioritize mutual education as a learning tool to collaborate with our partners, community members, to create these accessible presentations, webinars, clinics, events, etc. Once again, leading into the fact that accessibility means different things for different communities, and really listening to our partners as well as our clients and to what information they're asking and what way is the most digestible on their end. And lastly, we tend to destigmatize any misconceptions of immigration law and the socio-political narrative that accompanies that. The reality is there's so much information, right? And often our families and we hear clients take information from Facebook, from YouTube, from the news, from a neighbor, right? And we're working towards making sure folks are getting what is the true information as opposed to misconceptions with media, with law, etc. So once again, making sure that all this information can be digestible and that we are destigmatizing any misconceptions about immigration law. So that's UnLocal in a nutshell. I always like to mention here, we are small but mighty. Our entire staff is no more than 20 folks. So once again, for the work that we do, often folks are like, oh, you must have a really large team. Not at all. There's quite few of us. And on the education outreach team specifically, I'm supported by 3 other colleagues, just to give you all an idea. And I often have folks ask, you have an office? Yes, we are over on Midtown on 29th Street. We often host events in our space, and I will talk about those next, actually.
These particular
Yes, not yet. So our programming in our office. So our programming really divides itself in 2 ways. One, outreach, like I'm doing here today, where we talk to schools, partners, educators, etc. And then we have our internal programming, and I'm going to highlight 2 here. Beginning with our community closet, which came through conversation from our social worker and our clients who were asking if we had additional materials in office, such as coats for the winter, Pampers for babies, shoes, book bags, really anything that folks can take with them as a necessity for themselves or their children. So through conversation with our social worker, our clients, we began doing community outreach and building out our community closet, making sure that as a staff, we go ahead and switch out seasons. So right now we're collecting coats for our coat drive. Before the school year starts, we do a back to school book bag giveaway. We recently have included school books, picture books, books for folks who are beginning their chapter series. So folks at the very least can go away with the book when they come into our office, similar to how little ones get a book when they go to the doctor, and truly everything in between. We often take donations from staff. So here you'll see we even had a bassinet at some point that went fairly quickly. And our community closet is open to community members and clients. And that being said, if folks know anyone who is in need of a winter coat or any materials at all, really, once I mentioned, we do have a little bit of everything in that closet. Feel free to reach out to me and I can connect them to make an appointment. So they don't necessarily have to be a local client per se, just a community member in need. And now diving into our community and connection series. Now, this project specifically came from students directly asking what happens after college, what happens post-grad. So a little bit about my day-to-day is I speak with students individually to support them with the New York State DREAM Act applications, and we'll dive into what that looks like a little later. And through these conversations, I often was being asked, okay, let's say I go to college, or maybe I'm in college and I decide to go ahead and finish the 4 years. What happens after, right? Where is that post-grad opportunity that I'm not hearing in my classroom, that I'm not hearing at college? I'm hearing you'll get a job and no one's taking into account my immigration status. What happens then? So through these conversations, we created the CCS series that goes ahead and introduces young people to different mentorship figures and resources directly in our office. So I will highlight one specific event that we do every year that's coming up in November that I will go ahead and share with a flyer with everyone afterwards as well, called the Career Parent Share. And that is specifically when we invite either formally or currently undocumented professionals across all fields. They come to our office and they do a panel discussion where they share a bit about what they do, as well as how they got to that point, how they interacted with their immigration status throughout this process. And then we do an open mingle hour with our students. And that really has been, once again, a direct ask from students, right? Wanting to connect with someone who could directly relate to their experience. And then from there, build that mentorship opportunity. So it's really been my pleasure to meet with these students one-on-one and then take directly what they're asking for, right? To create programming that feels inclusive, that feels targeted to exactly what their need is. And I will share a fun little video. Among mentorship opportunities, we also have opportunities of just like mingle from different artists that we have in our community.
These particular
As you'll see here, we had a flyer for our annual Immigrant Wellness Resource Fair. That's another event that really came through students asking directly for additional resources, right? Where they feel safe enough in our office to then inquire about healthcare, then inquire about after school programming for their little ones. And I think it's very important to work on building that safe space so then folks feel comfortable with you enough to ask for additional resources, to connect you with their friend, to connect you with their neighbor who might need additional support. Which brings me right into our next phase, best practices when working with immigrant students and families. So beginning with never assume. As we've mentioned, there are a lot of folks that are now introducing and welcoming newly arrived students. You'll encounter students that have been here for 2 weeks, 2 months, and then students who are undocumented that have lived here for a big chunk of their lives. And I think for all these students, it's really important to never assume ethnicity, spoken language, navigation capital, digital literacy, etc. You will truly see it all for students who have recently arrived, also students who have been here undocumented for quite some time. And when we advise folks to, in order to combat this, almost not urgency to assume, but almost like trigger to assume, is to ask open-ended questions to all your students. That way, there's clear conversation where they are prompted to share what they want as they want, as opposed to being almost told what to share when you go ahead and phrase questions in the assumption as opposed to open-ended. And that brings us to create a safe and brave space. Let your students know that you're present for them, advocate, even if you do not have the answers. And I think that that's very, very important. I think often I'll encounter educators who I think struggle to let students know that they are an advocate because they have a level of shame or guilt for not having all the answers, and if not most of them. And to that I say, one, the immigration world process, court, is very, very difficult. It is very, very difficult. I tell clients in English, let alone in a different language, because they don't offer translation often. That being said, it goes such a more long way to let folks know that you will work with them to help support and figure out those answers, as opposed to either not acknowledging that they exist, or what I think is more harmful is spreading misinformation. And I think what often happens here is students, or pardon, teachers ask, well, how do I let them know there's an advocate? And I think that's one of those questions that become a bit more internal than outward, because that, what I have done both at UnLocal and prior is letting students know directly. And when I say directly, I mean I am an advocate for immigrant students, and I support migration, and I support folks being here. And I think when it's clear as day, there is no longer any assumption, or there's no longer any gray area where folks no longer feel comfortable sharing. And to say that, if I were to share that I am an advocate, I don't expect everyone the next day to, go ahead and really tell me all, right? I think it's taking that one step to show that your classroom is a safe and brave space. And then from there, that goes ahead and creates an environment where students can choose a bit by bit to share more about their experience, their family's experience, because they know that you have taken that initial step to go ahead and begin that conversation. And that brings us to our next point, creating inclusive programming for all. Taking cues from your undocumented students and their needs to create holistic programming, post-grad, access to higher education. That looks like bringing healthcare services, right? Talking about our immigrant resource fair. That looks like bringing in, we had a lot of asks for how banking works in the US, right? If students can access banks if they're undocumented, and the answer is yes. Depends on what bank, but students can go ahead and access debit cards, even if they are undocumented. And once again, listening to students' direct asks and making sure that this programming is available to all. I think what happens often with good thought is to make, let's say, this session available to students during their lunch period, right? Not only does it, one, take away a free period, but two, already segregates the students who might need these resources, who maybe feel as if it's revealing to them that they have to, let's say, miss lunch for the meeting that Ms. Castillo was hosting, right? As opposed to, let's say, third period when everyone's in class, Ms. Castillo comes in and talks to everyone, right? There's no need to reveal any sort of status or any sort of need for information, because everyone's going to get it in the classroom. And regardless if everyone needs it, I often tell students, and students often reveal to me, hey, I didn't need this, but I have a friend who does, or I have a family member who does. I have a neighbor who really have benefited from being here. Can I give them your email? So taking that into account, that it truly is a benefit for everyone when they come in and listen to programming for all, as opposed to creating programming that is supportive, but then often gets segregated into its own Zoom room or into its own lunch period. And in that itself ends up being an obstacle for some students. And lastly, and how we touched on before, be honest about questions you don't know. Refrain from spreading information, and if always you are unsure, err on the side of caution and tap into resources like UnLocal. We are here for you in case there are pointed questions that we can, tap into either my colleagues or our legal team. The reality is misinformation goes a lot quicker than we thought among our communities, our students, and just like the greater New York. One big piece of misinformation that occurred over the summer was that there is something called the NYIC ID, which is specifically an ID for New York State that folks who are undocumented can receive. There was huge misinformation that folks could get that, and that would also be a driver's license. And when I tell you the lines at every office was insane, we had folks coming into the office asking us about this process, and it truly came from, once again, word of mouth. All it takes is for a couple of people to share something that isn't true, right? And I think it comes from a good place. People want to be helpful, but misinformation is so much more harmful on a larger scale. And lastly, creating a follow-up system to communicate further and or research, right? Whether it looks like you reaching out to someone from UnLocal, doing research on your own, letting students know that there is a follow-up system, and once again, that you are serious about trying to find those resources for them as opposed to giving them almost half-baked questions or half-baked answers. And that brings us to current state policies. Myself, I keep myself up to date on state policies as well as New York policies as we live in New York, and I think that is super crucial, the need to self-educate and keep yourself up to date, specifically with access to higher ed and immigrant students. So I bring this up as I work with students on a one-on-one, and I often have students share with me that either their family plans to move or they're looking into college elsewhere, and I come back here and I will send this link over to Sandy to share with you all to the National Immigration Center. And they are really helpful because they create this beautiful map that goes and shows different state policies and laws for students who are immigrants and accessing higher education. So you see here it varies. For some states will go ahead and completely deny students enrollment. Some have tuition equity laws, some ban enrollment directly. And once again, it's really important to use this as a beginning tool for students who are thinking about access to higher education, not only in New York, but beyond, right? Because we have our families often move, just so they have an idea of what access to higher could look like in case they do choose to move elsewhere than New York. Today, we will focus on New York. As you see here, New York is green. There's tuition equity laws and policies, and we'll talk about those financial aid opportunities as well. So diving into the overview of New York State. So someone who is a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident has access to admission to colleges, federal financial aid, also known as FAFSA, in-state versus out-of-state tuition, and grants, loans, and scholarships. Now, jumping into someone who is undocumented, which is without legal status, or someone who has DACA. And we will talk about DACA a bit more later, but just for now, DACA stands for Deferred Action Against Childhood Arrivals, and was a program set up during the Obama administration that allowed certain individuals, that means certain criteria, access to a work authorization and a social security number. It is not status. And currently now, DACA applications are only being accepted via renewals. No one can apply to DACA if they do not have an existing renewal. Now, folks who are undocumented or who hold DACA, they have access to admissions both to K through 12 and to college universities in New York State. And that's super important to remember as a myth buster. As I often hear, I thought I was, I'm undocumented. I thought I couldn't go to college. That is false. Students in the state of New York have access and cannot be denied tuition in New York State and or enrollment as someone who is undocumented or who holds DACA. Make that very clear. Someone who is undocumented can go to college and can receive state aid opportunities if they're eligible, and we'll get into that next, but cannot be denied enrollment. Now, very important, they cannot access federal financial aid, money from FAFSA. They do not have that access. And what I tell students to differentiate state aid and federal financial aid is that federal financial aid is money from Washington. State aid is from directly the state of New York. And then next, they do have access to in-state versus out-of-state tuition rates. So just like someone who lives in New York and isn't documented, they have the same right to have the in-state tuition, let's say, of a CUNY, as someone who has also lived here and has U.S. citizenship. And lastly, I have question mark here for grants, loans, and scholarships, because really it will depend on the school and on the program. I tell students to read very carefully so they do not waste any time applying for things they may not be eligible for because of immigration status. And I also will share a link later about scholarships that are specifically just for students who are immigrant students. Very, very important to read that fine print so students don't waste their time applying for things that they aren't eligible. And I tell folks, if it is unclear, then I would give that school or that program a call directly, either with the help of a guidance counselor or a teacher if they feel uncomfortable speaking on the phone themselves about their status, but rather asking straight up as opposed to losing their time. And I want to note here that not all immigration status are represented. We will talk a few more later. And if there's any additional questions afterwards, by all means, I'll be sharing my email. Now we are going to dive into the New York State Dream Act, beginning with eligibility, jumping into the application process, and then later state aid. Now, the New York State Dream Act, as I mentioned, is a state aid opportunity, comes directly from the state of New York, and it was passed in 2019 after 10 years of organizing efforts led by undocumented students. I always make a point to say that this effort, one, took a long time, and two, was directly from students who are undocumented and asking for this need, because I think it's important to empathize with students how powerful they are when they do organize together. Now, what does the DREAM Act do? The DREAM Act grants undocumented and other students access to apply for state aid opportunities. And we will talk about who are those other students if they are not undocumented, as well as the state opportunities to come. And I want to make this really clear. I think this distinction is super important. The New York State Dream Act is not an aid opportunity through FAFSA. Often I hear that gets kind of miscued. The New York State Dream Act is specifically, once again, aid administered through the state of New York, and students who are undocumented are not eligible for FAFSA. So these exist like on two completely different planes. Once again, completely state administered. FAFSA is not an option for students who are undocumented. Now, the eligibility requirements for the New York State Dream Act: who's eligible, and what does that process look like? So there are two education categories that a student can go ahead and fit to be eligible. They must meet one. The first one being that have attended a New York State high school for at least 2 years and graduated, and enroll in a senior CUNY within 5 years of graduating. So as you see here, time is super important. So at least 2 years in a New York State high school and enrolled in a CUNY or SUNY within 5 years of graduating. So let's say I graduated from a New York State high school in 2020. I have until 2025 to enroll in a senior CUNY and still be eligible for DREAM Act funding. If I were to go to school 6 years later, 7 years later, I will no longer be eligible for DREAM Act funding. Now, if a student did not receive their high school diploma, they could have received their high school equivalency diploma and received their New York State equivalency diploma and enroll in a senior CUNY within 5 years of receiving their HSC diploma. So you see here, it's that same timeline of 5 years. I received my equivalency diploma in 2020. I have until 2025. And they must meet one of these requirements. I know often there are students who will potentially come with some education already done in a different country, and that will also make them ineligible depending on the timeline. But it's super important to pay attention here to that at least 2 years and that 5-year enrollment prior for both categories here. Which brings me to our next slide. Am I eligible if I have a high school degree from a different state or country? The answer is no. The degree either has to be from a New York State high school or an equivalency diploma from New York State. Unfortunately, that is how the law is written. So someone who comes with a diploma from, let's say, Georgia would not be eligible for DREAM Act funding. And the same thing from a different country. Next, I'm already in college and haven't applied to New York State DREAM Act. I see that happen often. Folks who, let's say, they're in their first year, their second year, and they had no idea DREAM Act funding existed. They would still be eligible, once again, as long as they met the education requirement that we talked about prior, which is enrolling in a senior CUNY within 5 years. And next, am I eligible if I enrolled in a college 6+ years after graduating and or receiving a high school diploma/GED? Unfortunately, no. Once again, those 5-year marker is very important to the law. Students who enroll after would not be eligible. And lastly, am I eligible if I attended a New York State high school for 1 year? As we mentioned, we have a lot of new students coming from different countries who will go into different grades. Unfortunately, they will have to be in New York State high school for at least 2 years to be eligible for DREAM Act funding. It is very much how the law is written, unfortunately, and does make a lot of students ineligible. And it is something to pay attention to before they begin the application process. And I see our chat has a couple of messages here. I don't think any questions at this point.
No questions in the chat, but I do have a question, Diana. 2 questions actually about the DREAM Act. I haven't really dealt with the DREAM Act in a second, so I just wanted to clarify. Can students receive DREAM Act funding to attend, like if they applied for TAP, which I know you're gonna talk about in a few slides, to attend a non-CUNY or SUNY college?
That is a great question. There are certain schools that do partner with DreamX, so yes, but they would have to look at the TAP list, and I can show folks where they can go ahead and see that. It's all SUNY and CUNYs.
All right, cool. And then my second question, I'd love to be able to see the list. And then my second question was back before when it first came out, there was like a third option for education. And I feel like I took advantage of that. So I wanted to know if it's still around. So I was in high school for just 1 year, like your example here. And then I went and I got like in-state tuition at a CUNY when I started. Can I then do a DREAM Act application?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. The student has been there for 1 year.
They only attended for 1 year. Then let's say they went to BMCC and were able to get in-state tuition. And then they wanted to apply for the DREAM Act TAP. Like there was a thing, like if for any reason you got in-state tuition, you can then also potentially be eligible for a DREAM Act. Or am I like totally at like?
No, that was a beginning rendition of DREAM Act. For folks in the room, like this law and application has changed quite literally about 10 times. For full transparency, even the screenshots you'll see today was not what the application looked like 2 months ago. Same question still, but it changes its format quite frequently. That being said, Sandy, not that I have seen. I can do some more digging to see if that's like in a back page of HES somewhere, if that is their third option or third almost like loophole. I can do some digging. Not that I've seen recently, but I want to make sure that for some reason that wouldn't be a third avenue that students can take.
Thank you so much, Diana. And then I'll share it out with folks if it's there. But thank you so much for the update.
Yes, of course. As you see, DREAM Act is straightforward in a lot of ways and funny in a lot of different ways. Like I said, the law now it's a bit more than 2019, so a couple of years now, but continues to change in its form quite frequently. So probably in a year from now, we'll have to change our screenshots again. Now jumping into the immigration requirements. So we just touched on education and now the immigration requirement for the application process. So in order to be eligible, you must hold and or meet one of the following immigration statuses, beginning with the T visa for victims of human trafficking, as well as sex and labor trafficking. The VIEW visa for victims of a qualifying crime, and this specific visa requires cooperation and assistance of government officials and law enforcement. Next, TPS, also known as Temporary Protected Status, which grants individuals from specific countries that have an ongoing emergency, such as ongoing armed conflict, environmental disaster, and that prevents the individual from returning safely to that country. Next, DED, also known as Deferred Enforced Departure, is a benefit authorized at the discretion of the President of the U.S. DED protects certain individuals from deportation and allows them to live in the U.S. for a limited period of time, and sometimes work authorization is extended as well. Next, DACA, which refers to a program created in 2012 via executive action to offer work authorization and protection from deportation via continuous renewal. It is not a lawful immigration status, and UCIS is only accepting renewals. So once again, someone who was able to apply to DACA while it was first rolled out, they can continue to renew that application. But anyone who, let's say, comes across DACA now and see that they're eligible, they are not able to submit a new application. And lastly, someone who isn't documented refers to someone who is living without lawful immigration status. So once again, someone has to hold one of these. It could be that they have DACA, it could be that they're undocumented, they have one of these programs that we talked about, but they must have one of these programs and or are undocumented to qualify the immigration requirement of the New York State DREAM Act.
We have a little question, sorry to interrupt, from Norma in the chat. She's asking if for the DED status, does it just currently include Ukraine and a few other countries? Do you know?
Great question. I believe Ukraine is currently on the list and a few others. I can go ahead and send the website that we continuously look for updates. The reality is it does change quite often, which is why we don't list them here. But yes, I can go ahead and list them. And yes, I can repeat them. So yes, and it is date specific, as you'll see what the website is sent. both DED will expire after a certain time, which is why it says it's for a limited time period. So I'll chill back. Temporary permanent status is granted to individuals from specific countries that have been selected for an emergency situation, such as ongoing armed conflict or environmental disaster that would prevent an individual from returning safely. And noting here that these countries are specifically selected by the US. So often I'll hear folks think about a different country that's experiencing turmoil and wondering why they're not on the TPS list. It is just up to the US government. And next, DED, deferred enforced departure, which is a benefit authorized at the discretion of the US president. And DED protects certain individuals from deportation and allows them to live in the US for a limited time period, going back to the dates. And sometimes will allow folks to receive work authorization while they are living in the US. So I can go ahead and send the website where TPS and DEM countries are updated. And once again, you'll get the slides, and we also will send over a one-pager that has these definitions as well as a few other immigration statuses that you might come in encounter with when speaking to students. Thank you all for the questions. Yeah, of course. And now the number one question I'll hear after speaking about both immigration and education statuses. Am I eligible if I came to the US on a visa that has expired? Let's say it's a program that's not even on the list. It's what I hear most is it's a T visa, tourist visa. I came here on a tourist visa. It expired 3 years ago. Am I eligible? The answer would be yes. If the visa a student came on is expired, they would be eligible because they would fall under the undocumented category for someone who is living without lawful immigration status because that visa has expired. Next, am I eligible if I am in immigration proceedings and actively awaiting a court date or a letter? So have begun, let's say, applying for, it doesn't even have to be a program on the list. It could be someone's applying for asylum, let's say, or for a U visa or a T visa. Would they be eligible? The answer is yes. When someone is in immigration proceedings, that gray area of waiting for an update, a court date, a letter, a decision, etc., they would be eligible because they are in that gray period and would once again fall under as undocumented. Am I eligible if I have an immigration status that was not mentioned? Unfortunately, no. It has to be specifically the immigration status is listed or undocumented to qualify for the New York State Dream Act. And lastly, am I eligible if I am an international student? The answer is no. Someone who is an international student is not out of status, so would not be undocumented and would not fall under the additional visas. So someone who is an international student would not be eligible for the New York State Dream Act.
We have another question in the chat from Carrie. Is it 2 school years for the academic requirement or 2 calendar years?
That's a great.
Yeah, she says, for instance, if a student came this month to school, right? Would this count? Like, would they have to wait till 2 years from this month?
Yeah, great question. I've seen, one, they don't specify it on their website, but two, what I've seen with students that are in this sort of boat of coming, let's say in November or December, that as long as they are here for 2 full school years, that they are not looking at the month of enrollment. Because what we'll talk about later is that the proof for 2 years is a transcript. So as long as they are here for enough of the semester that the school counts them for 2 academic school years, then they would be eligible. Great questions, y'all. As we're seeing lifetime folks come in a bit later, I want to make sure that they potentially would be eligible.
And then Robin added to it, she says, but what if the transcript only has 1 semester on it?
So if they have 1 semester and let's say they're here for, let's say, a year and a half, according to the transcript, or yes, they would then not be eligible. But what I have seen in a lot of cases is that students often who come in a bit late have to take summer school for additional credits, and that summer school chunk of time will often count as the other half of the day they have missed, because this is a moment of humanitarian crisis that we are living lifetime. I think that's why Dream Act doesn't have these specific scenarios on their website. I've definitely seen it more on a case-by-case basis. So once again, students that I have worked with that I have seen submit an application that have like a year and a half and then also have taken summer school while they have been in the US and that high school, their applications have been approved. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like a green pass for all, but at the very least that has been working with students so far. I'm curious to see if DreamAct will enroll anything, as we, as they more than likely have seen how many students we have now welcome to the US, and specifically to our New York State schools. I can follow up with them. I have a contact at DreamAct to see if they have any updates on their end. But if it's 1.5 semesters and they have some sort of additional schooling they have to complete, I would go ahead and help support them in applying to see what happens.
Thank you so much. We love all the offerings for follow-up that you're giving us in addition to your answers. I love that. Thank you. Norma had her hand raised. If we could take one more question.
Yes, of course.
Norma.
So I'm going to say it out loud and feel free to tell me no. I just put in the chat. So this happens all the time when I'm helping a student with DreamAct. And I always err on the side of like, let's try, let's apply, even if we don't get the answer we want, because when you read the eligibility, right, it's like, if you meet one of the following. And so I'm always hoping that like you are or will be charged New York State resident in-state tuition rate at SUNY or CUNY will be the catch. Like that will be the one. And then like, yeah, it doesn't matter. They were here for a year. Please pay this. And oftentimes the students just get through. And the worst that I've seen happen is that they end up with a bill. If we've taught them some good advocacy skills and they navigate it with the financial aid office, it usually goes through. So I'm just putting that out there.
No, 100%. Yeah, that's why I tell students if they have the 1.5 years, apply, right? The worst case they say no and they receive, a larger bill that they can work with residency. And with CUNY, that usually looks like bringing bills from home or some sort of proof that they have lived in the US and in New York for at least, I think it's 2 years by CUNY, or 1.5 years. Their like residency always switches as well. I'm seeing here that you are charged New York State, in-state tuition at a CUNY for any other reason. And that's the catch-all I think Sandy was talking about.
Yes.
Which I have yet to see work, but hey, if folks are, by all means, I think it's helpful to apply and see what happens. And letting your students know that like, okay, technically you don't meet the eligibility flat on, but why don't we try, right? And see what happens. I am a big proponent in applying and seeing how the dice roll, because clearly this application process is not cookie cutter and they don't treat it. And yeah, exactly. Worst case, they defer, they take time off. Some students go ahead and save money and do the community college first and then go ahead and transfer. There are a ton of options, but by all means, applying, seeing how the dice roll. And I can follow up with the New York State resident tuition rate. I'm curious to see how they explain it, especially because I have yet to see it work on my end, but if they have some idea to what would categorize that, I can go ahead and report back.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you, Norma. We have one more question. Can we take it?
Yes, of course.
Go on, Eddie. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's been very helpful. So I have a question regarding one of my students. So my student it did the DreamAct application, actually, I think in the summer that just ended. And it wasn't given, like the application wasn't accepted, basically. And
Okay.
I'm thinking, at first I wasn't sure why, but also the student hasn't been here. Now that I'm listening to like the presentation and you going over the slides, I'm thinking, I wasn't sure why, but after, listening to everything you've been saying, I'm thinking it's because the student hasn't been here for 2 years, because the student hasn't been here for 2 years. I think it's almost 2 years, but just to clarify, so for a student to be eligible for DreamAct TAP, even though they have TPS, and for him, he had a letter that showed that he has TPS, basically like why he's here and stuff like that to prove that. And we uploaded that on the DreamAct application.
Okay.
So just to clarify, a student has to be here in New York State for 2 years before, even if they have TPS, they have to be here for 2 years before they're eligible for DreamAct application.
They have to be in a New York State high school.
Okay, because I think it was only here for like 4th grade. So he graduated, but I think it wasn't up to 2 years. So they have to have been in high school for 2 years.
Yes, traditionally, yes.
So let's say the student has been here for 2 years, like been in New York State for 2 years, but they've been in high school for 1 year. They still wouldn't be eligible.
Usually, yes, which is what we have begun talking about in the chat. Usually they are very specific about the 2 years in New York State, but as Norma was talking about, She has seen some students then go to college, let's say for a year, and then apply for Dream Act, and that supports the 2 years. Unfortunately, this application is not as straightforward, which is why there are like little moments or little loopholes. The student can attempt to apply again while they're in college. But if they applied in a moment where their transcript only showed 1 year of them being in high school, that is why the application was denied, because they didn't have that 2-year marker. But they can go ahead and apply again. And while they're in or I don't know if you mentioned what college they're going to, but while they're in college, to see if they go ahead and use the charge for in-state tuition as a method of receiving that eligibility marker.
Okay, that makes sense, because student wanted to go to BMCC, but they couldn't get the L that they wanted at BMCC. But anyways, that's a different story. Okay, so they're really specific with the 2-year mark of being in high school. And if the student already graduated within a year, they could proceed to go to college, but they have to like complete a year in college, then reapply, like fill out a new application.
I would go ahead and have the student do that. As Norma was saying, I would also have them reach out to HESC. So when they're on the Dream Act website, there's like a help button they can go ahead and click and communicate with HESC. By all means, and I'll share my email a little later if you want to reach out and we can troubleshoot together to see if there is any way the student can still receive Dream Act funding while they are at BMCC.
Yes, that would be very helpful. Thank you so much.
My goodness, of course. And thank you, Norma, for all your support as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
No, there's no more questions in the chat.
Okay. Perfect. And by all means, once again, this is a very complicated topic. I tell students, once again, it's complicated in English, let alone a different language. So we are here to troubleshoot, and by all means, we can always reach out to HESC for any additional questions. So now jumping into the required documents. So someone who is a current high school senior, they can go ahead and use their unofficial or official high school transcript. So someone right now, let's say in their last year of school, they can go ahead and submit their transcript as proof of education. They would just go ahead and have to have their full name. The second piece of information that I like to go ahead and put for education is a letter from their school stating that the student is on track to graduate. Often, and once again, this is why the Dream Act application is so finicky. Sometimes a student can just submit the unofficial transcript and they're like, okay, great. And then there's other times the student submits it and it's like, oh, there's no proof or there's no graduation year, but it's because they haven't graduated yet. So that letter from the school, from a guidance counselor, usually allows a student to go ahead and just submit the unofficial and not wait for the official transcript. And it's very simple. You know, my student, Ana Castillo, enter the ID number of the school, is on track to graduate this upcoming June, is on track with their credits. Please let me know if you have any other questions. They can be submitted together. Now, a student who already graduated high school will need to go ahead and put their diploma as well as their official full transcript, because once again, they look at how many years a student has been in the school. And lastly, their New York State HS equivalency diploma. They would need the front and back of their diploma. And I say the back because that's where their HSC ID will be present, and that will be needed to go ahead and verify that they are a high school graduate from the GED. And as a general safety precaution, we suggest removing any address present on school transcripts. The Dream Act application will not ask for a full address of any sort. They will just ask for a zip code. This is really just for precaution once again. In the last 4 years that I have done this work, I have never heard of a student be targeted, deported, arrested for applying for New York State Dream Act. But once again, this application doesn't ask for a full address. So as a layer of safety, there's no need to put more information into the computer system than they need. And that's a super easy fix. That's taking a transcript, whiteout marker, etching it out, taking a photo, putting a post-it over. And just once again, this layer of safety is super important for our students in our community and our priority here at UnLocal. And I'll pause here for questions. I know we took a few before, but we can go ahead and tag on if there's any additional questions. And thank you, Norma, for putting the Dream Act follow-up information in the chat.
Any other questions about this, guys? Maybe we answered all the questions so far. I'll let you know, Diana, if anything comes up.
Yes, no, of course. And I'll mention here, I think I can't access the slide on my Canva right now, but the additional piece of documents that I'll go ahead and make sure that when I send the presentation has this one more slide, is that for any immigration status, let's say if they had U visa or a T visa, that they just go ahead and also upload whatever evidence they have of their immigration status. And if someone is undocumented, they don't have to go ahead and upload anything. They would just click that they're undocumented. So I'll be sure to send over the file that has that slide as well.
Thank you.
Great. And we will also have questions at the end. And as I mentioned, I'll be sharing my email. But if not, we can keep going. And now jumping into the application process for New York State Dream Act. There are a couple applications to go ahead and submit. None of them are specifically long, but once again, there's little hiccups and troubleshooting that might need to occur. So first, we begin with the eligibility form. Well, that will ask students their immigration status as well as their education requirement, but will not ask for that evidence proof. It's just a preliminary eligibility form. And then once someone is eligible, it'll go ahead and send you to the eligibility application. I wish they had different names. I think that this is what a lot of folks get mixed up on, but what can you do? So now we jump into the eligibility application, which will ask the student's name, their zip code. Once again, we'll confirm immigration status as well as education, and that's where students go ahead and submit those documents. They will go ahead and submit, let's say, if someone has DACA, their DACA status information, and go ahead and put their high school transcript and that letter. If someone's undocumented, they will not have to upload any proof. They'll just go ahead and put that transcript up or that equivalency diploma. So once we submit our eligibility application, typically takes about 3, I would say, to 5 business days to go ahead and hear a response. Students will get a lovely email saying you are eligible, you can move on. Super important. I have students say, I did the application and nothing ever happened. This is not the last step. It is just the beginning. So after a student is eligible, then you can go ahead and apply for the state aid opportunities. Today we'll talk about TAP and Excelsior and begin that process. And finally, once students submit those applications, I would say same timeline, 3 to 5 business days, they have the final step of accepting their state aid. I would say from start to finish, the entire process, if they are doing and receiving applications 3 to 5 business days, all takes a little under 2 weeks. There are times where it's a lot faster and students will hear back within like a day or two. I always tell students in the event that they don't hear back after the marker that they put down, which typically is 3 to 5 or 3 to 7 business days, to go ahead and follow up with HESC on their portal. I'll show you all where the help button is. Sometimes, and I don't know how, but applications will get lost. I'd work with students who have applied, don't hear back after a month, go ahead and ping HESC, and they say, oh, like the application was lost in like the ether web, and they're able to find it afterwards. But once again, we don't want students to apply and then never hear back and don't have a TAP offer and are wondering why those funds didn't get to them. So we will definitely chat about how we can troubleshoot with HESC. So when to apply. So if a student is enrolled in New York State High School, they can apply at the beginning of their senior year. They can, by all means, do it a bit later, but I encourage it in the beginning of their senior year in case there's any troubleshooting that needs to occur. And lastly, if you received your New York State High School equivalency diploma, then a student will go ahead and apply once they receive their official diploma in the mail. Now the application site, it is a free application. I often get that question from students. Here is the web address. I will go ahead and also send that link over to Sandy to share with you. So if I were creating a student account right now, I would click don't have an account, register, and I would be prompted to go ahead and put an email address as well as my date of birth. I recommend to students and educators, encourage students to not use their high school email if you know that it turns off or they like lose access to it, because they will need to easily access this email for updates. So a personal email is better if you know your school will turn off their email post-graduation. Now I am in, it is my first time on the portal. I would click here, add new application, to then be prompted with the eligibility form. Now, as I mentioned, this is like the pre-form. Students fill this form out once in the entire process of Dream Act. They must complete the eligibility form to access the eligibility application. And as I mentioned before, this form is not the eligibility application where you will submit the necessary documents. That kind of happens later. This is very much the precursor form. Now, the eligibility form, as I mentioned, will begin to ask questions regarding immigration status, as well as the level of study the student is seeking for postgrad. So if I were here, I can drop down, and if I were going to go to college next year, I would choose the year of 2024 to 2025. Then I'm looking for state aid. Here, I would click my immigration status, and as we go on, you'll see here what a sample application would look like. The student begins to put how long they've been in the high school for, either it's a high school for 2 or more years, or they receive their high school equivalency degree. Once again, questions about immigration status occur here. And then if they happen to have a social or an ITIN is a tax identification number. Students don't have to pay taxes to access this application, but if they do, they can note it. And now, after one over here, if this weren't here, I can see the submit button. When you go ahead and submit, once again, it'll poop you directly to the eligibility application form. This one, there's no wait in between. It's instant. If you're eligible, it'll send you to this form. If you're not, it will not let you move on. So the eligibility application, here's where students are going to upload both their education and immigration requirements. This form students will only fill out once, when and done with the New York State DREAM Act for eligibility. And once again, this form is not the state aid opportunities. Once a student is eligible, they can continue to apply for the state aid and scholarships. This application itself will not give students any sort of financial aid. Now, the eligibility application form, here they'll go ahead and give the student's name. As you see here, just zip code, once again for safety, details like marital status, because that will impact income later, and I'll talk about that shortly. Date of birth, if the student has ever had a different name, which is important. I'll go back for this a second. Important to use the same name for the student that's on their high school transcript for this application, so everything matches up. If a student has an additional last name on their transcript, I would encourage them to also put it on here, because often they will see a transcript that has an additional last name or middle name and then say these aren't the same people, which can be remedied if that does happen, but I encourage you from the start to go ahead and put everything exactly how it is in the transcript. Now you'll see here when you'll begin the school year, so they know when to begin the aid process. And then an important point for the New York State Education Department verification. So there are two options. Someone can upload their high school documentation, which we talked about could be an unofficial diploma, unofficial transcript, or they can be verified by the Department of Education. I highly discourage folks from clicking, I would like to be verified by the New York State Department of Education. That seems like it'd be the easier option than submitting a PDF. Unfortunately, it's quite the opposite. I have seen applications be delayed 3-4 months because the New York State Department of Education still hasn't verified that the student goes to that school. It takes way too long and will delay a student from applying from other state aid opportunities because the Department of Education hasn't done their part yet. In a case you meet a student who clicked that and is in that waiting period, they can go ahead and once again use the HESC help feature to go ahead and essentially change that on the application and add their transcript. So it can be remedied, but I highly suggest not clicking the verified by the Department of Education because it just takes way too long. And we have some questions here. Can you speak on undocumented students who are dependent? Do we know why they receive less financial aid? We will talk about that shortly. It really will go back into income and the income brackets. And when should students complete the eligibility form? Great question. So if they are currently seniors, they can go ahead and fill out the form. They can't access any aid until their senior year anyway, because they will ask what college they will go to. And students obviously begin that process in their senior year. So it will specifically be beginning this application process, beginning of their senior year. If it happens later in the senior year, isn't a problem, but should it be in the beginning? Yes, thank you. TAP opens up December 2nd this year. The eligibility application is always open on the portal. And no, they don't need to wait until December. I recommend doing this first application now, because if there are any hiccups, then you can have between October and November to work through them before, once again, the state applications open up. So I recommend kind of getting this one out of the way. You know, if it goes smooth sailing, then you're ready. If it takes a little longer, you aren't, getting anxious about the TAP application. I have a great question here. Sometimes when a student uploads their transcript, it is rejected because it doesn't have their graduation date on it. Is there a way to overpass this issue? Yes. Great question. What I recommend that we mentioned a bit earlier on is having a letter from the school, typically from a guidance counselor, stating, my student, Diana Castillo, ID number XXX, is on track to graduate this upcoming June 2025. They are on track with their credits. If you have any questions, please let me know, etc. That paired with the transcript usually goes ahead and gets passed for any application that is being halted because they don't have the graduation date on it. So I definitely recommend going ahead and supporting the student in creating that letter and attaching it with their transcript. But great question. That does happen every so often. So that seems to do the trick.
Diana, Norma has her hand up as well.
Yes, Norma.
Yeah, it's along the same lines here. So I have typically done the New York State verification option because of the rejected transcript for not having the graduation date. So I had not tried the advocacy letter. So that's helpful. I was just under the impression, which is part of the frustration, that this is a later process because I thought that they would have had to have the transcript that shows that they have graduated.
Luckily, no, they can go ahead and submit the unofficial. Why I recommend to do the unofficial is that then they have the whole school year to work
Mhm.
besides their wonderful educators and counselors, as opposed to receiving the official transcript a bit later in the year when they can potentially run out of time in school, especially as a
Yeah,
seniors wrap up. So I really recommend the unofficial transcript and that letter of advocacy to get this process started a bit earlier.
that's super helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah,
Which,
I had never heard that either. Thank you so much, Diana.
of course, I'm going to move us along for sake of time, and then we'll retake questions at the end. But thank you all for your thoughtful questions. I know your students really appreciate it. And as we go down here, you'll see once again, this is where you go ahead and upload your documents, that transcript, the high school diploma, etc. So one student receives their eligibility application has been submitted. They'll get this lovely little email. And then you'll see here that they will also get this via email receipt. I just tell students to keep in mind on the date once again in case they don't get a response back. And once they are deemed eligible, they can go ahead and click this little button that says add new application. And that's when they can begin their state aid opportunities. But they will have to receive the hey, you are eligible email first. Which brings us to the state aid opportunities. Once again, the applications that bring those state aid scholarships. Beginning first with TAP, also known as TAP Assistant Tuition Program. New York State aid, once again, from the state of New York. So the tuition assistance program is a 4-year grant opportunity at a maximum award of $5,665 per academic year. It is available to full-time and part-time students, and the award amounts depend on individual income factors as well as additional factors such as are there multiple students in the household that go to college? Is a student married? Do they have children? And they will go ahead and ask this later on. For the TAP application, students must apply every academic year to go ahead and receive these funds. It is not like the eligibility application. It is not a one and done. They must apply every single academic year to receive funding for the next year. Now, a student will typically hear back 3 to 7 days after submitting their application. They must accept the award via their portal, and they will get to see how much they will receive directly on the portal so students can have an idea of how much TAP will go ahead and cover. And lastly, students must remain in good academic standing to maintain their award. Good academic standing depends on the college in terms of what that grade point average is. Now the income limits, it is a max income of $30,000 if you are an independent undergraduate student, single without tax dependents. I'm noting here back to the question of why is the award often so much lower for students who are independent? Unfortunately, because the DREAM Act application sees them as one person, as if 30,000 is a very large income for one person. I will note before, in almost 2 years ago, the max income was 10,000 for someone who was independent without tax dependence, which was like completely undoable. But noting that it has increased and now allows a bit more students to be eligible. Next, it is 60,000 if you are an independent undergraduate student married without tax dependence. And lastly, 125,000 if you are a dependent undergraduate student within a household earning under the income, or if you are independent undergraduate student married or single with tax dependence, or if you are an undergraduate student who qualifies as an orphan, foster child, or ward of the court anytime since the age of 13. And once again, these are just the limits directly on the application. Unfortunately, there is no way around it if they are if those are their incomes. What I tell students to go ahead and do, as often undocumented students receive cash payments, they have to estimate their income to go ahead and take into account holidays, anytime maybe their work site was closed, anytime they were sick, to go ahead and get the most accurate number that would be reflective of their income for that year. Now, what if my family / myself has never paid taxes? Am I eligible? The answer is yes. This application does not require you to pay taxes. It will ask if you do, and then we'll ask for your tax ID number, but you can go ahead and just click I do not pay taxes, and you will be asked to estimate how much your yearly income is it's always the year prior. My family / myself only completed our tax returns for a couple of years, but I didn't file last year. Am I eligible? The answer is once again yes, even if they submitted a couple of years sporadically, but last year didn't file for whatever reason. That is not a problem. Once again, we'll have to just estimate the income for the year prior. I receive my earnings in cash. Am I eligible? Yes. You will go ahead and once again click you do not file taxes and go ahead to the best of your ability to estimate how much income you had the year prior. Once again, take into account when their work site might have been closed, any days they had off or could not work, etc., to get that most accurate number. I do not work and my income is 0. Am I eligible? Yes, you can go ahead and put your income as 0. If the person has 0 income, they can go ahead and put that. Their application will not deny that income level. I have sometimes students ask that question. Now the TAP application information. What do students need? They will need to know the name of the college that they are attending. They will need to know their college ID number, and that's because the application works to go ahead and send that money directly to their school and show up on their system backended with the name and the ID. And lastly, they will need to know their family / individual yearly income or estimated. Now, I know a lot of you support students with their application process and you're thinking, well, students don't know the name or their college ID until a lot later, right? Usually in the months of March. I recommend starting this application. As Laura mentioned, it comes out December 2nd. I recommend starting the application. There are some students who will know where they will probably go to school or maybe have an early acceptance. Other students who do not, and they can go ahead and just save the application until they have an idea of what college they will be attending. Worst case, if a student, let's say, no, so they really want to go to Hunter and we have an idea they're going to get in, they can go ahead and put Hunter. And then let's say they decide to change their mind, they're going to Baruch instead. That can be changed internally with the HES helpline. They can go ahead and give a new college name and a new college ID. That is not an issue. So things can be amended if needed. And if students are unsure, they can save the application and just hold off until sending. The TAP application, this is a form that has been submitted, but has the same questions as you'll see here. Once again, student information, as well as here you'll see they need to put the name of the college and their ID number that we will see here. It will ask questions about the student's dependency, if they live with, if they're married, if they have tax dependents, asking about, once again, the question that was brought up before, if at any time they were awarded the court, an orphan, etc., household income, and if there are any other folks in the household that will be attending college. That's right here. And lastly, members in the household, which you can see here. How many members in your household be full-time college students between X dates. This will all give TAP, once again, all the factors that they need to decide how much your award is. And then if you have any documents you need to go ahead and upload, they will go ahead and prompt you here and then just sign the application. It is not necessarily long, but often students will have some delays in receiving this information from their parents, especially if it is about their income. So I always recommend to students, if it's helpful for myself to be present to talk about this application, or if yourself as an advocate, as an educator, want to walk through this process in an application. And for most parents, it's about safety, right? They're worried about putting this information somewhere. So supporting them in knowing that this application does not ask for an address, it's not asking for any parent name. When they are cash earners, they will ask for parent name when they are tax ID payers, but it's not information that they don't have, public otherwise. Now, Excelsior, another state aid opportunity, is a 4-year scholarship with a contract between HESC and the student. Students must be enrolled full-time and fulfill 30 credits per academic year to remain eligible. Now, students must remain enrolled in school without pauses in their education. I will share this with you all as well. There's a list of what is extreme situations where students can pause, which is like being called to military service or sudden death in the family, extreme illness. Those are the only, I would say, not loopholes, but they're the only other options that would allow a student to take a pause without completely ending their funds. And once again, the student must apply every academic year, just like TAP. This is not a one-and-done application like eligibility. Now, as I mentioned, this application comes with a contract, and it requires students to work and live in New York State for the length and time they receive the award post-grad. So let's say I graduated in 2020. I received Excelsior for all 4 years. I have until 2024 to go ahead and work and live in New York State. Let's say I had Excelsior for 3 years, and once again, it would take me to 2023. Students don't have to do the full 4 years. Some students, they decide 4 years postgrad in New York. I don't want to commit to that. I can do 2, I can do 3. Some students know they plan to live here for a big chunk of their life, so they go ahead and do the 4. I recommend students to talk with their partner, their family, etc., because they don't want to be in a position to break the contract. Because if the student were to break the contract, they would have to pay back the funds. And we don't want any student to be in that debacle. And lastly, the student's college will communicate the award amount directly to them. Historically, what Excelsior does is look at what additional balance is left for the student and supports them in covering, if not all of it, some of it. But that is why the Excelsior application on the portal will not tell the student how much they will receive, only TAP will. Now the Excelsior application, here's in the read all. Once again, we'll go ahead and ask for student information as well as college. It looks very similar to the TAP application, if not almost exact. We'll ask here household income. It'll always be the year before, and we'll have the right here that filing requirement for Excelsior is filling out a TAP application. So they must fill out TAP first and then Excelsior. Now the income limit for TAP, or for Excelsior, it is $125,000, and the program is open to eligible students from families who earn up to $125,000 a year to attend a SUNY or CUNY college tuition free. Excelsior usually comes out between the months of April and May. They are a lot more finicky about having a specific date. I will send over a link to Sandy that has a notification sign up for students via email or text. That's what I tell students to do, to go ahead and essentially go ahead and receive the notification as soon as possible. Now, some additional resources as we wrap up, and we will have time for questions. We at UnLocal have individual assistance for New York State DREAM Act, and that can look like troubleshooting, unsure if your student qualifies, if the application is denied and you're not sure why. General support from start to finish. There are some students, I support from the form to the eligibility application to TAP to Excelsior, and then I get to see them every year until they graduate, which is really, really a pleasure for me. And I really do mean that I'm here as a researcher for you all. If that looks like coming into your classroom, if that looks like supporting your student with their family members, by all means, we are here for you, and you can contact me directly for DREAM Act support for students, nysda.local.org. This is where students and educators can specifically make an appointment with me for DREAM Act support. I have a Calendly link that we send out, and students can go ahead and find a time to meet. And I also do speak Spanish, so in case you have students who would prefer to speak and communicate with their families in Spanish, we can work on making that possible as well. I want to make that very clear that this is a free service. Often students worry if there is any cost. There's no cost to this support. And now, tagging to the CUNY undocumented support page, they have quite a ton of resources from scholarships, from healthcare, from legal. What is one of the biggest takeaways for me on this website for students is that if I were to scroll down, they have a section called Immigrant Success Liaisons, which is a contact at every single CUNY school about someone who can directly support them with general questions for someone who is undocumented. So once again, a student can go ahead and begin asking questions to someone that they know has a general framework and understands that their experience is a bit different from a student who is not undocumented. Next, Immigrant Rising. They have this really, really great list of scholarships and fellowships. You'll see here that a big chunk of them are geography located to California, but also national. So they have quite a ton of scholarships across all of the states of New York, some that are national. They have different filters here that you can put by region, by field of study, by immigration status, and they have quite a ton of opportunities. I always tell students, more money is great, right? Save on transport, save on your books. Spend some time here on Immigrant Rising. Lastly, Informed Immigrant has great resources for students who are undocumented and navigating undergrad, K-12, and graduate school. They have some great guides and additional resources, as well as just general topics regarding healthcare, legal services, etc.